Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to a wonderful Wednesday webinar with the Climate Emergency Centre network of 35 odd centres all around the country reusing vacant shops on the high street to get community resilience organised and build local alliances. So, this week we have an amazing speaker who spoke at the Westminster Central Hall National Emergency Briefing, Hugh Montgomery. He's part of a group called Real Zero and works in the NHS and is an absolute amazing, inspiring speaker. He can tell you more about his great work. So over to you, Hugh. Thanks so much for coming. Really
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you very much for having me. Let me bypass the system private window picker. All right, I suppose I'm going to let it do that. Right, always fun to do. They always do this, don't they? They change the.
Sometimes it's okay. There we go. We can see your screen. It's
Yeah,
all good. Yep.
you
Yep.
can. Good. Let's just try
Uh,
and get that up to presentation mode for you.
COP 30. I see in there. Yeah, on the big
There we
climate.
go. Um, is that working for you?
Yes. Big yellow canary. Roger.
Good, thank you. So yes, as you've heard, I'm Hugh. I'm a professor of intensive care medicine at University College London, where I run a research centre. I've been working climate change in addition to that for some 27 odd years. And I run a non-profit that's charity funded called Real Zero, because there's no such thing as net. And I co-chair the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change, which is a 57 country commission that reports every year, as well as United Kingdom's Health Alliance on Climate Change, which represents about 1.2 million members. I was indeed speaking at the National Emergency Brief, and I am well aware that anybody who's on this call knows everything there is to know about climate change. But what I thought I would do is give you the narrative that I would have given at Westminster Hall had I been given the time, such that when you are showing the film, which I hope that some of you will, you know what it is that I would have said. So you've got this recording. For those of you that would need it, I usually don't let people have my slide deck because they don't know how to say what I'm saying. But I think for an erudite group like this, I'd be prepared to liberate the slides such that you could use them and go into a little bit greater detail as to why we're all so frightened. So I pulled together some of Tim Lenton's data and my own data and others for this particular talk. It's not about health. It's about survival. So you know this, but this is the talk I would have given. I would have told my audience that they were to remember their O level in my money, but GCSEs for other people who are younger, photosynthesis, where just carbon dioxide and water get drawn down to make glucose. The glucose polymerized to make cellulose. The cellulose gets eaten by plants, and gets eaten by animals, and other animals eat the other animals, and all the carbon dioxide that was there ends up as carbon in those animals, and the carbon is released as carbon dioxide and water again when those animals and plants die and rot. And of course, that's what we're meant to have, is a nice stable carbon cycle. But as you're aware, for 500 million years, about 550 million years, lots of small plants and animals didn't die and release that carbon dioxide. So it is 500 million years worth of CO2 that we have stored as those fossil fuels. And that's a very, very, very dangerous genie to release 500 million years worth of carbon dioxide in a matter of decades, which is what we're currently doing. Now you've got to see my screen, which is not there. Okay. I think we'll go through that because you're all familiar with it as to where those come from. But methane is one of those fossil fuels. It was rebranded as natural gas by the fossil fuel industry because natural gas sounds nice, and methane is something most of us don't like. And it coexists as a gas or in oil wells or coal seams. It coexists with carbon monoxide, both of which are colourless, odourless, and lethal to humans. Methane having the additional problem that it's also flammable and thus explosive in the right combinations with oxygen. And this, of course, was a big problem in coal mines, because if you were wandering around with a candle, chipping away at coal, and you had a pocket of methane, it blew you to smithereens and you died. Furthermore, if you're walking into higher densities of that gas, or the carbon monoxide too, you die of essentially from poisoning of those two gases. And that's where, of course, this bird came in. The experiments, the conclusion of those done by John Scott Haldane, who was your average polymath doctor, philosopher, and religious man as well. What he'd wanted to do was to see if there were any animals that were more sensitive to methane and carbon monoxide. And he found that small animals like mice and canaries were 20 times more susceptible, and they would curl up and die much more quickly than a human would. But he decided that he would take canaries down coal mines for the simple reason that mice don't sing. And once the canaries stopped singing, you should listen and get the hell out, because the next thing would happen is that you die. Just in case you want the trivia, there actually is a singing mouse. That's the Alston singing mouse in rainforests. But it's the only one we know of as a singing animal.
Wow.
There you have John Scott Haldane with a canary in one of the little cages he would have taken down, with his respirator, which he would put on if the canary stopped singing, and then get the heck out of Dodge. But of course, the gas, the methane there, which is being flared at the top and set light to at the top left, wasn't alone. We've got fossil salad in the form of coal and these other small animals largely that formed oil. And that 550 million years worth, we're burning very quickly. And we have to remember we only started doing that really at the Industrial Revolution. And it was John Tyndall that warned us in 1859 that releasing all that carbon dioxide could cook our planet, because he'd identified this phenomenon known as the greenhouse gas effect, whereby carbon dioxide, along with some other gases, lets shortwave radiation through, but traps longwave radiation.
Hugh, did he give his name to the Tyndall Climate Centre?
He did indeed. That is why it's named. But sad to say, this is another story where the men get the credit and the women did the work first, because the first time that this greenhouse gas effect was reported was by Eunice Newton-Foote, who reported it a full 3 years before Tyndall did. And she described this greenhouse gas effect too, and also warned 170 years ago that if we burned these fossil fuels, then largely coal, we risked our own survival. And that was the first time the canary stopped singing, really. We received the warnings and no one took any notice at all. And indeed, last year, this is what humanity burned. And those are vast quantities going up every year. And the problem, as you're well aware, is that the atmospheric half-life of carbon dioxide is very long. It's quite complicated. A fifth of the CO2 we emit today will still be boiling our planet in 33,000 years from now. 7% will be boiling our planet in 100,000 years from now. And the CO2 we emit today, for it all to disappear, if we release a kilogram of CO2 now, it would take 400,000 years for that CO2 to disappear. And this is the problem that we have. People are acting as if there's time to slow down and come to a gentle stop. And there isn't, because what we release now continues to boil us for geological timescales. And on the left hand panel there, you have release of carbon dioxide and equivalents, CO2e, in gigatons. So those are billions of tons. And you'll see that we started releasing the CO2 around 1865 or so. We were releasing not a great deal, and things really took off, that big inflection point in the mid 1970s. And it's been going up every single year, as I've just shown you. Last year we released around 54.6 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent. On the right hand, well, actually, I suppose that in addition is a steady rise. We're up 0.8% in 2024 and 1.1% last year. So we're not slowing down our emissions at all. And this story that we have, that we're deploying more renewables, is true. But that makes absolutely no difference to the atmospheric CO2 concentration if you're not displacing fossil fuel burning. And we're not. We're continuing to add to the mix. And that's driving up the atmospheric concentration of CO2. These are the Mauna Loa or Keeling data with which you'll be familiar. This sawtooth pattern really being the Earth breathing, the CO2 concentration falling in the spring as plants draw down CO2 and rising again in the autumn as the leaves fall off and rot. And that's meant to be a flat line. But as you can see, the concentration is going up, and it's going up ever more steeply. And indeed, we're breaking through records. Last year, we bust through 430 parts per million of CO2 in the Mauna Loa data, the Keeling data. And this is trapping a lot of energy. I find it more helpful to talk about energy gain than global warming, which sounds rather nice, global heating, which still sounds rather nice, or global average surface temperature changes, because they don't sound very big. Radiation gain is the problem. We're trapping long-wave radiation. And if we look at the number of zetajoules of energy we're trapping and convert that into Hiroshima bombs, this is the running 36-month running mean. And you'll see that we're now way up there. Probably this year going to punch through 14.8 Hiroshima bombs of energy a second being added just to our oceans, with another 8 or 9 being added to our gaseous atmosphere. If you want to know what 11 looks like, which were the previous data, it looks like this. And that's going on all the time at an accelerating rate. If we were going to go back to the graph, you'd see that we were gaining around 2.7, 2.8 Hiroshima bombs a second in 1980, and we're now doing around 15. And that is cooking our Earth's surface temperature. We bust in 2003-4 through 1.6 Celsius, according to the Copernicus data. And we now know from this paper in Nature that appeared this month that we've now lived through the 11 hottest years on record. We've got this massive energy imbalance. Things are going wrong very quickly.
Wow.
It's cooking our land. This is land surface temperature, which has now risen by 2 Celsius. The European landmass is much worse. We're approaching 2.5 over the European mass, and very, very much worse at the poles, where we're now punching through 3.5 to 4 Celsius, because the poles are warming 4 times more quickly than the global surface average is. And you would understand, and we'll come to this later, why that is so important, because melting land ice in the Arctic is very, very dangerous indeed. And we are. This is the data from this year. We bust the average midwinter temperatures in Greenland were plus. They weren't even below freezing point. And we're cooking our oceans. We've now added well north of 300 zetajoules of energy to our atmosphere, to our oceans. That's just the top 2 kilometers of oceans. And that would be enough to take 17 trillion Olympic swimming pools from freezing point and boil them off. And that's, of course, what's actually happening. We are evaporating colossal quantities of water from our oceans into the atmosphere. And the warmer atmosphere can hold that water, because for every degree we go up, the air can hold 7% more moisture. And the moisture doesn't stay there. It forms clouds, some of which act as to produce a greenhouse gas effect high up, and others come out as rain or snow. And when they do, they release that latent heat of evaporation, which is why you get these massive storms that are increasing. We're melting land ice. We're now reaching a record low every single year. Last year was no exception, lowest ever recorded. And these were the graph. I pulled this graph actually from a talk I gave about 5 years ago, which gave us the average sea ice extent, or maximum sea ice extent, running from the last 1,500 years, and showing you that drop off really between about 1990 and the year 2000, falling off a cliff edge. I thought it might be quite fun to use the same image and show you what's happened since then. Because we now have to take that axis down here, and that's what's happened since.
Wow.
So we're losing gargantuan quantities of sea ice, and we're also melting land ice. We've lost nearly 9 gigatons, 9 trillion tons of land ice since 1980 alone. And that rate is also accelerating. All of these functions are accelerating as you would expect the physics to do. And as you melt land ice into the sea and you thermally expand it as it gets hotter, sea levels go up, and they are also going up more quickly now by around a centimetre every 2 years, and accelerating. And remember that none of these processes will stop going up, and none of them are going to stop accelerating because of the atmospheric half-life of the greenhouse gases, which we discussed. And if you add energy to an atmosphere, you get weather. The more energy you add, the more extreme weather you get. and the more extreme weather events you get. So these were the maps of the fires in Canada 2 years ago. That was the picture from New York as the smoke drifted down and no one could really breathe very easily. This was just over a year ago in Valencia in Spain, where you had that baking hot time that was followed by massive rainfall and therefore flooding that killed hundreds. Remember, only a year ago, this was the picture of Los Angeles from space as the fire struck it. And just think what's happened in the last 2 years. India breaking its temperature record of above 52 Celsius. This was Australia in February of this year, approaching 50 Celsius. This was January in Britain with record rainfall, as you remember, huge amounts of cropland underwater. And this was the Costa del Sol at the same time, being massively flooded. And we're getting like the boiling frog. We're just getting used to this and accepting it as normal. And it isn't the new normal. These are the foothills of absolute catastrophe. This is only the beginning. The reason I'm concerned, as I said in my national emergency brief in Westminster about health, is that I really don't care particularly about the health impacts. We are not going to die because of malaria, Zika, dengue, salmonellosis, heat stress and heat illness. We're going to die from the socioeconomic consequences, which are already striking us. So we have lots of reports in Nature, the World Meteorological Organization and others showing these sorts of colossal losses. Swiss Re losing 100 billion for the fifth consecutive year that year. Even 2 years ago, we were losing $4,500 a second to climate change driven extreme weather events. $4,500 a second off the global economy. That's the bad news. That's where we were. But things are getting worse very, very much more quickly indeed. Global heating is accelerating, and it's accelerating hard. So these are the data published in March of this year, so last month, looking for all of the standard data sets from NASA and NOAA, HADCRU and others, adjusted and unadjusted for other effects. And what you see is this steady rise in temperature that has now suddenly taken off in the last 5 years or so. We've suddenly accelerated global heating. If you adjust it for the Southern Oscillation, solar output and volcanism, you still see the same effect. A sudden kick up in the rate of heating. You can see that again, these data from Barclay, looking at the rate of temperature change in degrees per decade. And you'll see the rate was remaining fairly constant, and in the last few years has suddenly stepped up. In fact, it's doubled, if not tripled, in only the last few years. You're seeing that reflected in temperatures. So these are the temperature rises, and the blue lines are these sudden jumps up in surface temperature we've had. So the gains are really there. And the question you've got to ask yourself is why? You're seeing it too in the oceans, the Pacific Ocean here, this sudden inflection point around 5 or 6 years ago. So we're now on a really catastrophic path that's running away from us. Well, part of that is because we've triggered a bunch of positive feedback loops. Methane, we've talked about as a greenhouse gas, but methane is 83 times as powerful a greenhouse gas in its first 20 years as is carbon dioxide. And as we heat carbonate rocks, we release frozen methane clathrates. We're releasing frozen hydrates of methane from the tundra. And as we warm wetlands, they ferment to release methane. So we now have a positive feedback loop where heating is causing more greenhouse gas emission, which is causing more heating. We're seeing the same from the Antarctic seabed. As that's heating, we're getting melting sources there coming to the surface. And we know from fires that we're getting from global heating that the fires make carbon dioxide, but they also make carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide takes out hydroxyl radicals, and hydroxyl radicals are normally responsible for methane breakdown. So we are lengthening the atmospheric half-life of methane. So we're not just emitting it from coalfields and gas, we're not just releasing it from spontaneous from the land, but we're extending its atmospheric half-life, which we're also doing because by burning trees, we remove the bark. And the bark has a microbiome that also normally breaks down methane. That is the reason why we had this rise in methane concentration in the atmosphere, which plateaued off as the Earth reached a new equilibrium at around 2015, but it is suddenly accelerated. Again, this sudden takeoff in atmospheric concentrations of methane. It's because we're not just releasing it from fossil fuel stores anymore and from our gas cookers and boilers and so forth, but we're releasing it from natural sinks. We're also evaporating water, which acts, as I mentioned before, as a greenhouse gas in a high atmosphere. The fires are releasing carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas. And just remember those fires in Canada. They added 6% to global greenhouse gas emissions that year just on their own. Lightning strikes are now setting light to tinder dry rainforests. We're losing 16 soccer pitches a minute to fire. The Arctic tundra is now not just fermenting, but respiring, releasing its carbon stores. And above ground, we've also lost the Australian boreal sinks. So they're now net emitters too. We've got one new one that just came up, which I thought I'd add in. This came out in February of this year, but has been reanalyzed and published again this month. We're seeing changes in ocean circulation, which is changing the flow of nutrient phosphate to microorganisms that would use it as fuel. And that is making those bacteria switch to generating methane, which is being vented from the sea surface. So a whole range now of positive feedbacks where heating is now causing more greenhouse gas emissions, which are causing more heating. On top of that, we're losing all the sinks that would normally draw carbon dioxide down. As this State of the Planet report from the 17,000 global scientists said, the land sinks are now failing. But there's something much more punishing even than that, and that's the loss of what's known as planetary albedo. So albedo is the phenomenon by which white stuff, so low altitude cloud or snow or ice, reflect sunlight straight back into space so that they can't heat us. We're melting snow, we're melting ice, and exposing increasing amounts of dark ocean and land to absorb even more heat. But we're also changing, for reasons we probably don't have time to talk about today, losing low altitude cloud. So albedo is collapsing. We've lost around 0.5% of that just in recent years. And you might say, well, 0.5% really isn't very much. But gaining 0.5% of total solar radiation to an entire planet is an enormous amount of energy gain. You could turn that the other way up, actually, and look at absorbed solar radiation change, and that's what you see. We're getting a huge increase. It's gone up from around 2013, where we were around 0.2 watts per square meter as anomaly, and we're now at 2. So a tenfold change. If you plot the difference between incoming and outgoing, that's the Earth's net energy imbalance, and you'll see that it's getting suddenly very much wider in recent years. So these are the reasons why we're gaining this sudden acceleration in heating. So there are your canaries. There are a lot of them. And I no longer think of these as threats to human health, as I say. I think these are now threats to human survival. And they're not threats to our grandchildren. They're not threats to future generations. They're threats to me. I'm 63. They're threats to my son, who is 20. And as Michael Marmot pointed out, the social determinants of health aren't a footnote to health. They're the main problem. And that's where we're going to fall apart. There isn't a hope in hell of staying at 1.5 degrees. Not a hope in hell. And we've punched through 1.6. We're probably going to go through 1.8 within 20 months. The banks, even in March last year, were expecting a 3-degree world. That's what they were planning for. And actually, we now know it's going to be a lot worse than that. We've had this.
That's a really telling fact there. Just one second, you just to focus on that. If JP Morgan and Stanley are actually, they probably have some of the most accurate data and they're preparing for that, then that's something to say to people that the people with the most money in the world who have the most accurate facts are actually preparing for that. That's shocking.
Yeah, it is shocking. And it's going to be a lot higher than that, and the impacts are going to be worse. This paper came out in Nature on Monday of last week, showing that if we look at the extremes like effects on food production, precipitation extremes where people live, fire, etc., we're now going to get the impacts we thought we'd get at 4 degrees. We're going to get them at 2 degrees. And we're going to reach 2 degrees probably within about 4 years. So the catastrophic predictions of 4, we might start seeing within 4 or 5 years. And we're already seeing systems fail that won't recover for millions of years. These are global surface temperature maps, and you'll see there's this cold blob at the top. And that cold blob should worry you because that is cold water coming off Arctic land, particularly, and flowing into the northern oceans, cooling with fresh water. That jams what's known as the Atlantic Meridional Overturn Circulation, which is a huge Atlantic conveyor. It drags in hot water from the Pacific, really, essentially past northern Australia, up past South America, and then up past us. Part of that is the Gulf Stream. And then what it's meant to do is that salt water is meant to cool, and because it's dense, sink and travel its way around, and it creates this circular motion. But if you put in low density water, fresh water in the top, that doesn't sink as you put in that cold stuff at the top. And because it stops the sinking, you jam the entire conveyor belt. That changes global weather patterns. It intensifies sea level rise. It collapses the monsoon cycles for which agriculture in Africa and Southeast Asia depend for billions of people. And it also destroys the nutrient upwelling that feeds the entire ocean supply chain. So if this goes down, ecosystems fail, food supply systems fail, and human civilization fails. There is that circulation which I referred to. And we've had papers now, more canaries singing, for several years, all using the same phrase, that we're at a point close to a critical transition. How soon? Well, very soon, according to these papers, but actually even sooner than that. Because this paper was saying at the high emission scenario, which is gaining around 8.5 watts per square meter, the AMOC would collapse with a 25% chance. And it would have begun in 2023. We are now at 8.5 watts per square meter because of the effects which I've just shown you. That loss of surface albedo is the equivalent heating of adding an extra 170 parts per million to atmospheric CO2 concentrations. And we've got evidence of collapse some part already beginning. This is the North Atlantic subpolar gyre, which we now know is collapsing. So at least part of the AMOC is now on the way out. And you won't put that back for millions upon millions of years, nor will you be able to regrow the coral reefs, which Tim Lenton pointed out in October of last year, have now reached the tipping point. We're going to lose them now for certainty, unless we can stop emitting and draw down carbon dioxide and geoengineer to draw ourselves down to less than 1 degree of heating. I'd put it to you that that's not going to happen. So we are the last generation that will have had coral reefs.
There is one Project Drawdown. It's a very comprehensive plan to how to draw down, but we need information like this to shake us into action at all levels of society. Over.
We do. It's going to drive huge societal impacts, the global melt in ice at the top. Of course, when the AMOC switches off, the Arctic ice field will then extend down to Hull, and Edinburgh will be back under 3 miles of ice. So crop growth in the Northern Hemisphere will be a thing of the past. Remember, too, that when we were at 2 degrees, the last time we were at 2 degrees, sea levels were 25 meters higher than they are now. The last time we breached 420 parts per million, sea levels were 58 meters higher, and we're at 430 now and going up very steeply. The economic impacts are running away too. We've started at $4,500 a second, as I spoke about, but we now know we're committed to a loss of around 1/5 of our global economy. This paper was now 3 years old, so in 23 years from now, we'll have lost 1/5 of our global economy, but probably more. The reanalysis of that suggested that we would lose 50 to 70% of our economy by 2070. And of course, along the way, civilization would have long collapsed. We now had these other papers coming out looking at the economic costs of emissions. The paper in Nature again a week ago, 8 days ago. A single flight causes actually around $1,700 of damage. A single flight once a year for 10 years causes around $1,780 worth of damage over those 10 years, but up to $77,000 worth of damage in the coming 80. And we're seeing these huge impacts of past emissions just since 1990 for the US, going to be having impacts of over 1.3 trillion. Now, what does this mean? Well, 3 degrees is what the banks think we're going to get. I've explained to you it's going to be a lot more than that. I've also explained that the impacts that we thought we'd get at 3 or 4, we're now going to be getting at 2. But look at what the faculty of actuaries and insurers said, the people who are really good at assessing risk. They say at 3 Celsius, there'll be 4 billion deaths. That's half the global population. And they're going to move before they die. So there'll be socio-political fragmentation, state failure, and mass migration and war. Indeed, they warn that without immediate transformative action, and quote directly, our economy may not exist at all. We've been warned by the food industry. The food industry seniors put this report out. This was last year, saying that we can no longer rely now in the years coming forwards on the predictability of the food on our own tables in the United Kingdom. And the DEFRA report, which the government commissioned and then got frightened by and buried, which, as you know, got released under a Freedom of Information Act about 2 weeks ago, said that it was almost certain that we're on a declining collapse trajectory, meaning that there is a realistic possibility that in under 4 years, we will be at strategic risk of catastrophic failure to our food supplies. Now, it might not happen in 4 years, but there's a significant chance, according to DEFRA, that it would. And if it does, what happens when there is no food in Great Britain? As Richard Nugent points out at the emergency briefings from the military, we're only 7 meals away from chaos. And the England crop harvests are indeed failing, as they are around the world. We've had 3 of the worst harvests in the last 5 years, and this year's, because of the winter wheat and the winter barley and the root crops, will be similarly badly affected, costing us billions. More canaries. We were warned even 6 years ago that we're soon to have 3 billion people outside survivable temperature limits, where 3 billion people live at the moment will have temperatures that are not survivable. We know that we're heading towards a mass extinction event, and the data would suggest that even for a 2 Celsius rise, we're going to commit 1/3 of the species on the planet to extinction, and a lot more if we go up beyond that. The Planetary Solvency Report summarised this for the insurance industry. Again, 3 degrees is now the impacts we're expecting to see at 3 will now get nearly much less, at less than 2. But they viewed this as the worst case scenario. And remember, this is what the banks were working on. Multiple climate tipping points triggered, GDP losses of more than 50%, half the world's population dead, and they pointed out high levels of extinction of, quotes, higher order life on Earth. And this again coming from the insurers.
We have some of the most accurate information and really want to know most accurate so that they can protect the insurance.
Yes. We've been warned by the IPCC that any further delay, this was 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, threatened us missing a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. That's one where you and I and my son might survive. And as I said, the insurer said, we've got to go for transformative change, not incremental anymore. The scientists have given us another dead canary. This was 2024 State of the Planet report. I'll let you read that. So this is why I'm concerned. We have had so many canaries. Here's another one. This was the national security, so our intelligence agencies, with a suppressed report again. Suppressed because the sorts of data I've just given you are ones that would spook the market so badly that it's sort of might trigger societal collapse. That's why they buried it. But again, they're talking about collapse of natural ecosystems and economic disaster potentially being just years away. The same as DEFRA saying just years away for food. Everyone's saying the same thing. We are approaching a point when we can do nothing, and then everything will collapse like Jenga. And yet the sort of nonsense we get from our negotiators is this. Whenever you hear from a COP negotiation that there's been a great deal reached, it's always worth reading what was agreed to. This was what the agreement was from COP 30. to establish a mechanism to enhance cooperation to support a fair shift to a green economy. Well, that means nothing. That could have been written by ChatGPT, and it probably was. They were going to invite roadmaps to transition from fossil fuels and halting deforestation to take place outside the COP negotiations because they won't get anywhere inside them. And they agreed, thank heavens, to integrate gender considerations into national climate policies. None of these things address reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And in fact, it was banned from being discussed. The COP negotiation wasn't allowed to talk about cutting emissions. So, are we stuffed? On the scientific data, almost certainly. And can we do anything about it on the scientific data? Probably not. But the only logical thing to do in a survival situation, and I deal with those at work most days, is to fight like hell. Because if you're on the boat that's sinking and you accept that you're going to drown, then you definitely will. The only chance you've got is to fight like hell, and you've got a chance then that you might make it. And if we all act quickly together to trigger the actions we need, and that's essentially moving the money in the markets and moving the politics for regulation, it can be done. Remember, there is no such thing as net reduction. Net just means you draw down the CO2 that you can carry on emitting. We know that offsetting has failed. It does not work. It has never worked. Do not console yourself by taking a plane and spending a few pounds on offsetting by buying trees. They don't work. The entire Californian stock of trees that were planted for that reason burned down 2 years ago. We also know there are limits. If you restored every ecosystem, every peatland, every mango swamp, planted a tree everywhere on Earth, you can plant a tree where there isn't one, and those mangrove swamps survived, the peat bogs didn't burn down or blow away, and the trees didn't burn down, you can store around 5 years worth of emissions. Well, is that worth doing? It definitely is. But does it solve the problem? No, it doesn't. The same applies to carbon capture and storage. Remember, we're under the Paris deal meant to have drawn down 4.9 gigatons of CO2 last year, and we drew down 0.1 because we don't have the technologies and we're not deploying them. And even if we did, the storage geologically could only take enough CO2 to drop us by between 0.35 and 0.7 Celsius. Worth having? Definitely. In itself, the answer, no. So we need to electrify, first of all. And we can do that in our homes and everywhere else. That prevents the gas transmission. And there is enormous leak of methane from the gas fields through the pipelines or liquefied natural gas to our homes. And for those of us that can afford to do it, I'm in a rented room in a flat, so I have no agency in this at all. But we would have to move to get rid of our gas boilers, get rid of our gas stoves, go to our air source heat pumps. In businesses, get power purchase agreements, use electric vehicles, etc. We need to change what we eat. I'm sure we've all done this because 38% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the food supply chain. And a large quantity of that comes from belching cows. So shed-fed cows belch around 251 litres of methane a day. Pasture-fed ones can belch up to 750 litres per day. And we're now grazing cattle on a land surface area greater than the entire continent of Africa. And we're adding steadily every year. This is the number of ruminant livestock, and it's going up very steeply indeed, as is per capita meat consumption. It's unhealthy, it's not necessary, and it's driving up greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to move to plant-based foods. Just by way of example, my drug of choice is coffee. And if you look at taking the coffee beans, growing them, transporting them, drying them, roasting them, grinding them, extracting the solute, formulating it into instant coffee, melting sand to make a glass jar, making a plastic lid, shipping it around the world, putting it on a supermarket shelf, me spooning into a cup, water being pumped, chlorinated, and me boiling it in a kettle. The greenhouse gas emissions from a splash of cow's milk are greater than all of that. Of GlaxoSmithKline's products 10 years ago, its worst offender when it made consumer products as well was Horlicks, because Horlicks was powdered milk. We need to move our banks. Remember, every high street bank is funding fossil fuel investment and further expansion of fossil fuel fields, all of them. So we can move to nationwide. I'm not with them. Apparently, they've got fantastic customer service. They don't invest in fossil fuels. I'm with Co-op, who don't have great customer service, but they still don't invest in fossil fuels. Triodos is another very good choice.
I'm
We,
so glad you're doing the solution section, Hugh,
yeah,
because I've got full information. There is something we can do, folks, every single day.
and if we do
Back in
these
here.
things,
Mhm.
move our banks, move our food, travel green. These are the numbers, just in case you want them. That's what a long haul flight first class is per kilometre, nearly half a kilogram of CO2 per passenger per kilometre, dropping to around 150 grams of CO2 per kilometre for an economy flight. And of course, you are travelling often thousands of kilometres. And that's a bus in Britain at the moment. That's UK rail on current grid mix plus a bit of diesel. That's your average foot passenger ferry, and that's Eurostar. So if I go to conferences in the continent, I take the Eurostar because most of the electricity, when you're traveling through France for sure, comes from nuclear power. So, and remember that walking is 6 grams of CO2 per kilometre. So we take mass transport. Here's the quick rundown of those. I won't labour them. But the other big bit is motivating and communicating round you and using your political and policy influence. And this is actually probably the most important thing. If you talk to George Marshall, who is the expert in climate change behaviour science, he
I
says,
saw him last week. He's writing his new book at the moment, Hugh.
he
Good
is,
old
he's
George.
terrific. He
Mm.
says, you've got to have acted, otherwise no one will believe you. But the most important thing you do is talk to people and you get them to take the action because we're social beasts. And it turns out, according to advertisers, that every single one of us has 7 people who love us or respect us enough to do pretty much anything we ask them to do. It might be a parent, a brother, a sister, a next door neighbor. There'll be 7 people that we can influence to take those actions. So you remember the R numbers from COVID days, the R being the number of people that one person will infect. So there's you, and you infect 7 other people. So now 8 people have acted. And each of those get 7 people to act. So the third wave of infection, 57 people have acted. Now, bear in mind, there are 57 people on this call. So we're already at 57. We're already on the third passage.
78 and rising. And this is the
78 rising.
networking theory. Keep networking solutions, folks. Keep
Right.
networking.
So there we go to
Action.
400 for the next passage. Next passage is 2,800. And then I got bored sticking green dots on the slides. But by the 12th cycle of infection, 16 billion people have moved, and there are only 8 billion on the planet. So if we start this brush fire, if we all take action ourselves and do the right thing, and we just get 7 other people to do the same thing, the entire global economy shifts, and it shifts in days because market forces are huge. The effects on the banking sector would be colossal. The effect on the food industry and transport sector would be enormous. And you know what? Politicians would then have a permissive environment in which to move. They would no longer be competing for how far right they are on these policies. They would be able to compete in a way for what's best for all of us. And of course, we all have elections coming up. We've got council elections on the 7th of May. And I'm not going to tell you which way to vote because that's not my business and I'm not a party political animal. But I do very carefully interrogate every person's plans and beliefs, and I vote according to those beliefs. It's important to communicate them to candidates because when politicians understand where the votes lie, they often change their policies. That's the virtue of democracy. So I'm going to stop at this point. I've made very, very clear the Canary stopped singing a long time ago. And to quote Higgins, the president of Ireland, if dead canaries were climate warnings, we'd be up to our knees in dead canaries by now. The only question really is what we're going to do about it. And I say, I presented you this evening the data. You're all climate activists, so you know most of those data. But what I've tried to do is give you the narrative that I would be presenting, and indeed will be for the showings of the National Emergency Brief film in the conversations and discussions afterwards, so that you're actually armed with the data that are genuinely completely up to date. They are within days of today. And I'll make those data available to you as well to weaponize. I would encourage you to host the briefings. If you've not seen the short film yet, it's 44 minutes. Chris Packard does a really good job of chairing it. But what we've got to do is make sure this doesn't stay in the bubble. Because if we all invite our friends and we're all in it, nothing will change. So what we need to do is get to the other people, those other seven, bring them along with us, because George Marshall points out that every survey shows people underestimate the level of concern about climate change. They all think that they're the ones who are worrying about it, and most other people aren't. Let's get the people in the room, let them realize that they are not alone in their fear, and activate those people that are not yet active. If you are interested, that's the non-profit, the charity-funded non-profit Real Zero that I run. There's a bit more information on there as well. But otherwise, I shall shut up and take questions if you have any, and I won't be offended if you want to go and get a beer or slit your wrists or.
You've given us hope as well, Hugh. Thank you. That was
Well,
one of the
we
most
can do it.
powerful
I mean,
We can do it.
there's a lot of work to be done. We'll need to change the political narrative, and we will need probably to go for geoengineering now pretty quickly, and carbon capture and storage and drawdown, and stop emitting. And we need to do all of that in a matter of only a few years. But hey, well, there's 78 of us on this call alone.
Really powerful. Thank you so much, Hugh. That was so absolutely packed with knowledge, information, and the deepest research. And we have a pile of canaries up to our knees. It's now, we need the solutions. We need, local global action on solutions. We need the spaces to do this, which is part of what the Climate Emergency Centres project is about. From these physical spaces, an alliance of groups come together, you can raise awareness and get out. Just quickly before we go to questions, I've been an activist since 1992 Rio Earth Summit, and from the
Mm.
2009 Copenhagen Summit we went and started, and Paris Summit we started filming people. What do you think the solutions are? Every single person we talked to had solutions. We just need the space, the political will, the funding, and the skill sharing of these things to really
That's
crack
basically
on.
it, isn't it? In the end,
Mhm.
politicians. I was with Chris Whitty actually the other day on a
Mhm.
health matter, and Chris is a very wise man, and it was about something quite different in medicine. But he's worked in government for a long time, and he says, don't expect any politician to be able to expend money when we're in debt by nearly 4 trillion, or political capital on anything that won't keep them in power. And that's not just because they're selfish. It's because if they genuinely want to change the world, they've got to be in a position where they can. So we've got to create that permissive environment for them to act.
Yeah, absolutely. Give them permission. So, folks, if you've got a question, a feedback, and comment, there's a heart shape down the bottom react button. We got 3 in the University Challenge already. So, if you want to, yeah, press the heart down the bottom, and we can see who's 1, 2, 3. Just checking, Hugh, have you got another 10, 15 minutes after 8, or how's your
Yeah,
timeline?
you've got me. That's fine. Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, absolutely powerful speaker. One of the most powerful we've had for a long time. Genji and then Vanessa, over for a question or comment, feedback, over.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hugh. I hope you don't mind, but I'd just like to, first of all, just acknowledge some of the emotions that people have been
Mm,
expressing in the chat. And
yeah.
I just would like to, if it's all right, just pause for a moment and just, you know, say, of course, we are feeling a lot of different things when we hear this. I've heard people say about feeling tearful, about feeling afraid. And
Mm.
so I just wanted to just acknowledge that just for a moment. We're in it together. Here we all are, working together. Thank you so much for letting us know everything you've told us today, Hugh, and the solutions. We are human beings and we are affected by all of this. So just, sending us love and working
Mm.
it out together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I am terrified. I'm terrified for my son because he's 20, and I'm angry. Those are my dominant emotions. I'm scared and I'm angry. But the only way we can get through it, as you say, is together, because that's the only thing that ever works, isn't it? The solace you get is from other people. Well, you get it from nature as well, but we are a band of brothers. We're going and sisters. We're going to war together, and that's empowering.
This is the great turning, hopefully, and we all mobilise together for the solutions. Vanessa and then David, over.
Hi, Hugh, thank you so much. Quick question. To propagate the facts and figures of your slides and also the climate emergency briefing, how has this been translated? So I have a lot of foreign friends who live, certainly in Europe and beyond, because obviously these messages need to be propagated beyond the shores of the United Kingdom.
Yeah. No, it's a very good question. Unfortunately, I'm your typical English person who was absolutely rubbish at language anyway. I've got school child French, and that's about it. So anyone who wishes to translate things, yes. We're not shouting enormously at the moment, but we are planning to propagate the national emergency brief to make that global, so that every country will have their own national emergency brief in their own native language. But we're going to try to make some of the core materials available. And we are also talking at the moment to documentary makers and others too, to try to get these things out, because the big documentaries like Seaspiracy, Cowspiracy and so forth, they've been very effective at changing public sentiment. And we need a similar sort of event. And much as I love David Attenborough, and I do think he is a saint, the problem with his programs, they always end on a, hey, we could do so much. And don't worry, there's lots of things we can solve it. And it never says what anyone's got to do themselves to change it. So people sit back and go, oh, that's all right, then someone's going to fix the problem. And they're not. We have to do that. So I think we need a bit more of a polemic as a documentary, and we are seeing if we can get that off the ground. And again, that would then be in multiple languages. There are other things we're up to, but I'm not going to tell everyone what they are, because we're keeping some things off the radar.
Oh,
Thank
cool.
you.
David Leverton on the architects team. Architects for a better future.
We like architects.
Thank you, Hugh. That was incredible, both inspiring and scary at the same time. The 7 actions that you had up, that slide, it'd be really useful if we could bring that back up and just have a little bit of a chance to review it, because we spent lots of time on the scary bits, which absolutely we needed, but the positive actions that we can take, I think, are really important. And
we're going to reframe these a little. I mean, the big ones are money, so that's an easy one. And it's like moving your power supply. It's a binary state change. It takes you 25 minutes online. It'll move the open banking platforms will move all your direct debits, all that stuff. There is a slight imbuggerance in that, if you've got a credit card that's registered on an online retailer, for instance, then you change your credit card, and then that is a bit of a nuisance. But overall, it's a 25-minute thing, and it moves the money, and that sends a very big signal to market. The same, I don't have any stocks and shares, but the average pension pot in Britain is responsible, if you look at its carbon footprint, for around 29 metric tons per person per year of CO2. So it's a really big ticket item. And again, it's a way of forcing the financial markets to realize there isn't money in the bad stuff and there is money in the good stuff. So moving pension provider, that's a lot harder. The energy supplier is pretty easy. I'm with Good Energy, who I've been with forever, and I think they're absolutely fantastic. People tell me that Octopus and Ecotricity are fantastic as well. So I'm not brand loyal. I don't have shares in Good Energy. But again, that's a 20-minute thing to do. And by the way, for these sorts of changes, I had a member of staff last year who was pretty effective. So she kept nagging her 7 people. And then the inn just invited them over for too much wine and said, look, I've got us basically a bottle of wine each. Come over and drink it on Friday. Bring your laptop and your bills with you. And we'll just start the evening by just doing this, right? We'll move our bank, we'll move our power supplier, and then get drunk at my expense.
Love it. I'm a firm believer of party and protest and party and social change. Get social clubs together to do this. This is great. And the solutions.
The plant-based food and stuff is really important. Again, we have to be very careful, don't we? We sort of, I think, rational green people, because it's very easy to portray us as tree-hugging, finger-knitting, muesli-eating sandal wearers. We need to represent these things in a right-wing cast. So one way of talking about active travel, for instance, and particulate pollution and plant-based food is to say those three things. Particulates do have a role in obesity, interesting enough, but the active travel and the plant-based food have a very big impact. 63% of the British public are now obese or overweight. The cost to healthcare and social care is north of £128 billion a year. And if you add lost taxes and economic losses, it's approaching £280 billion a year. And that would be enough to take around 25% off the base rate of income tax if we solve that problem. Now, that's a pretty good narrative, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, isn't it? We get British jobs for British farmers, British food. We get healthier, happier children and adults who are able to go to work and earn money for the British economy and pay their taxes. Meanwhile, the NHS becomes savable because most of its costs disappear. So these are ways we need to get clever at casting these politically in an acceptable way for others. The travel bit is relatively straightforward.
Pressure nozzle was another click.
All
So,
right.
yeah.
Don't know that, but somebody carry on, Hughes. Probably someone's just.
Don't worry. The travel bit is relatively straightforward, and as we all know, it doesn't ruin your life not to fly places. The pre-loved and carbon brands bit, well, you know, we just got to buy less and use less. But the really big bits are is not really the measuring your footprint and stuff. We're getting into chaff to change these. The really big one is that last one. It's getting those 7 other people and taking the political action as well as the personal ones with them together, because we've got to move our money and move our votes. When that happens, everything will change. We have enormous leverage by our personal actions. We are trying to raise the money for a simple tool for iPhones, for instance, that will allow people to surface the impact they've had on other people. Because we're all visual, aren't we? Well, many of us are. And if you could see those 7 and their 7, and you could see this tidal wave of people growing, it'd be incredibly empowering. So we are looking at trying to create a way of doing that.
Brilliant, Hugh. And take a photo while it's on screen, folks, those 7 acts, and share it with 7 people. 7 times 7, 49, and keep networking it out. Helena and then Viola.
80, aren't you? So the next round of 7 will be wherever you're 80, we're 560. So you're a heck of a long way there already, actually.
Absolutely. And there's 74 people on this call. There were 78 at the peak. So imagine 77 people sharing these 7 acts with 7 friends. And that's the power of networking. And I've been networking since 1992. And here we are. There's a movement of movements all around the world. We need to keep everyone is the center of a network. Everyone has contacts. Please keep networking and sharing, particularly sharing solutions and what we can do and actions. Helena and then Viola. Over.
Hello, thank you. And sorry, from that nice kind of positive sentiment, going to a depressing one again. I wonder, Hugh, if you are aware of any data from the effects of the war, from the kind of blowing up the oil fields and gas fields, but also maybe a bit of positivity with people going more towards decarbonisation and electrification.
Yeah, we are getting the data, and munitions do release a colossal amount of CO2. But it's not just that and the burning of the oil fields and setting light to gas tankers and all that sort of stuff too. It turns out there's being an effect from black soot, so partially combusted hydrocarbons and stuff getting thrown in the air absorbs heat. And it gets carried a long way, actually. It's one of the reasons that wood-burning stoves are now recognised to be a problem, because that stuff ends up landing on glaciers, for instance, and absorbing a lot more heat. So yes, wars are bad for lots of reasons, but they're very, very bad for greenhouse gas emissions. The impacts on fuel prices and whether it will drive the global economic change towards renewables is really interesting. Because, of course, the first thing it's done is make fossil fuels very, very much more profitable. So suddenly, and this is always the problem, if fossil fuels are cheap, people use lots of them. And if they're expensive, the oil companies drill more of them because of supply and demand effects. So we've now got a lot of states making a shed load of money out of fossil fuels, and the people who invested in it making even more money. And that's going to be a problem. The second is we've got this utterly false narrative, because if you go back, we've had, well, since the 1970s, 1972, this is the fourth major price shock we've had related to restriction in fossil fuel availability. Each one pushing prices up 2 to 4-fold higher. And the narrative is somehow being commandeered, isn't it? To say, well, the answer to this is for us to drill the North Sea, and because then we'll have our own gas and oil, and then we won't have to pay all that money and our prices will be lower. We all know, I'm sure you do, but if you're not familiar with it, the answer is that it's completely fallacious. The first is that we pay international energy prices. So it doesn't matter where we drill it out of, we pay the international market price. So the price of petrol, or gas as they would call it in America, is up 35% because of the Iranian war, despite the fact that America is completely self-sufficient in fossil fuels. So there's a very, very obvious point here. It doesn't make any difference to prices. The second problem is that we can't use most of the oil. Of the sorts of oil we drill, 82% can't even be refined in Great Britain, let alone used. So most of it gets offshored anyway, and we can't use it. The quantity of gas, were we able to extract it and use it, is only around 1.5% of our national gas supply. So even if we were to max out on it, it won't make any difference to the bills. And indeed, if you could drill it out, use it all, and not pay international market prices, the modelling suggests it will reduce bills by between £78 and £103 a year. So it won't make any difference. And it will lose us our place in climate leadership. So many reasons, but this is a problem because this has taken hold. You've got Keir Starmer even talking about Jackdaw now being given the green light because he's running scared of Farage. You've got Farage singing that song. You've got the Conservative Party singing the song. Pretty much everyone now is going, yeah, drill, baby, drill. The obvious logic is that which is clear to you and me, which is that not to be dependent on this stuff at all. Now, there is a slight problem with that. It's very expensive, and no one's owned up to that yet. The transition for the grid is enormously expensive. It pays off. I don't think we should look at it as a cost. It's an investment. That's what you do in businesses. You invest in a business, and then you get a return. That return will be in around 2040, after which power in Britain will be essentially free. Well, not quite free, but very, very close to free. But someone's got to pay for it up front now, and that has to be us. Unfortunately, we're the wrong generation, and it has to be our business. We've just got to bite that bullet. It has to happen at some time, and I share your view. One way of making this more acceptable clearly would be Labour to move off the marginal pricing, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. The power supplies are deployed in sequence from lowest cost to highest. So wind turbines and solar first, nuclear next, and then gas. But the price of that across all of them is charged at market rates for the price for the last marginal plant to be bought on, which is gas. Which is why if you have a solar, I'm with Good Energy, which is entirely wind and solar, but I'm paying as if it was gas. We've got to uncouple those two prices so that the public and the businesses see the value in being in the renewable market, and that might liberate some of the capital to go back into the grid. So there's a very long-winded answer to say that we need to, if we are going to win on the basis of shock pricing, we need to quickly convert the narrative from the way to solve this problem is to drill, baby, drill, and turn it around to say the answer to this problem is not to drill at all, essentially.
Brilliant. So much knowledge in there. Viola, I think we'll come for you for the last question, and then to sum it up and draw the strings together and keep thinking about the solutions, folks. Viola, over.
Okay, we had our first briefing yesterday to facilitators and organizers for Portsmouth in the south, and we are going to show at least six screenings. But two things actually came up, particularly when we think of our young ones. And I've got a grandson of 6 years, Hugh, and I know exactly how I feel when I see him each time. We need to reach the young. We need to get this film out to the young, because the young speak to their parents, and even as young as 6, we need to. I mean, I will contact Nick and Simon and say we really need to get this really quite quickly out, so we really can mobilize and get the numbers bigger. And the other thing which came out yesterday as well is somebody mentioned it's sort of like a bubble of us middle class people who know about it. But what about how do you reach the real? If I call it the people who go out there, work, they have no time for it, they are tired, they don't even know really what's happening. We need to get some sort of short version for those guys out as well, so we can really reach them. I think that it's a really good idea, and if we can raise more money, we could do that, because we must really get this moment. It looks fantastic. I mean, people really are, they are really scared, but on the other hand, they really do see if we do things, we won't stop it, but we can minimize the harm and hopefully find a way for your son, for my kids, and for my grandkids to make it somehow work.
Yeah. Well, you make some really excellent points, actually. So when I first started out in climate change stuff 20 odd years ago, 27 odd years ago, I went to see Steve Henry, who was then the greatest advertising creative in the world, and said, how do I get people to change behaviors? And he gave me a whole load of books to read, like all good gurus. And I went back and said, okay, I get it. It's children. And you're right. Adults' behaviors are really, really hard to change when you address the adult. Children are incredibly effective at changing adult behavior, which is why it's illegal to advertise an adult product before the watershed aimed at children. And Ford actually got done for it and fined some years ago because they advertised cars to children, because they knew that they'd have a much better bang for bucks when the children nagged their parents to buy that particular car. So we do indeed need to get children involved. And it's partly because they're persistent. Anyone who's got kids knows that they're at you all the time about the same thing if it's important to them. But secondly, they give the emotional connotation to it. So we know, for instance, if a random stranger tells a man, particularly a man, not to smoke, they don't take a lot of notice. If it's a doctor, they sort of trust them and go, well, maybe they know what they're talking about, maybe I should. But much more effective than that turns out for a man to be a daughter, because the daughter sometimes, oddly, is a bit more effective than sons for some reason. But it's because they nag every day, and they don't say, Daddy, please don't smoke because you've got a 3.7-fold increased risk of getting bronchogenic carcinoma. They say, Daddy, please don't smoke. I don't want you to die and leave me without a daddy. And that's a very much more powerful message. So I agree, the schools are really important. And you're also right, we need a sophisticated cross-sector mass communication campaign here that gets to every segment of society, because we live in a world where most people don't consume ordinary media anymore. They're not going to read any newspaper, let alone The Guardian or The Independent. If they do read it, the newspapers mostly are now owned by people who have an opposite message. We don't need to act. We shouldn't act. I'm thinking of the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, and so forth. If they're on TikTok or Instagram, the algorithms will continue to feed them the thing that the bubble they're in. So we'd all get green stuff, but everyone else doesn't see any of it at all, or gets the opposite. So we do need to find a different way of getting to people. And I think that's where George Marshall is right, in that the most effective communication we've got is our own voices and our own behaviors, because we interact with a lot of people every day. We don't need Instagram to do this for us. It's much easier. You can reach 2 billion people if you're the right user on Instagram, but it might not carry the emotional resonance that we can all get by our individual behaviors. So you're right, we need a mass comms campaign, we need a schools campaign. I have got the schools campaign there, but like everything, all of these things take money. And I don't have money. I'm an NHS doctor and I spend my money on this, but there's a limited pot. We have a couple of big campaigns ready to go that would be effective. We could do all of them for less than 800,000. But getting £1 is hard, isn't it?
Mhm.
Do you know another way? What we do is I don't know whether you know that, but there's a climate choir movement in the country, 17 cities, and then there's 3 now abroad, one in America, one in Zimbabwe, and one in Kenya. And we are doing a song like Switch Your Bank. And you sing about, you got to switch your bank, it's our moment, got to be banking with Monzo, shouldn't be banking with Barclays. So there's the singing sort of element is really,
Brilliant.
really
I love it.
important. People listen.
Brilliant. We need more songs, theatre performance, mate. Bring the parties in. I think we'll give a quick one to Genji. I just want to mention just briefly there, though, on engaging the youth and all classes, creeds and cultures of people. That's one of the things that climate emergency centres do because they are on the high street where Joe and Jane blogs public walk past and engage out of the green usual alternative bubble, shall we say, the green bubble, and everyday people walk in. Swindon Community Hub, 200,000 people came through in 2 years at their
Wow.
2-year birthday, they told me.
Awesome.
And they had all aspects of all parts of society coming in there. This is outreaching on the high street to people. That's why it's so important to get out of our green bubbles and into the main high street. And the other one is engaging the youth. The theme is always to get the young and the old together and learn from the wisdom of the elders as well as the energy of the youth. But we're doing a tree planting party campaign, working with Cara and some of the farming and landowning sector. We're doing a first one in Derbyshire. I know young people can bring together 2,000 to 3,000 people very easy for a big party. I've been there. I've helped them organise some of them. If we can bring the youth together with the landowners and the people to plant trees, plant gardens, permaculture, fruit-bearing forests, whatever it is, we need to push all these solutions. Last quick one to Genji, and then over to Hugh to say goodbye and draw the strands together. Thank you so much, Hugh. You've been incredible. Genji, quick one, over.
Thank you. So yeah, I guess it really comes to me about that reminder that some people might not be moved about climate change, but they are moved about loss of nature. And that is also something that children also respond to. It's something people can see in their own gardens.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. And I mean, we could have a long conversation about why nature is good for us. As you know, it astounds me that we keep having to have scientific reports that come up with another reason why being in nature is good for us. But you're right, we're also wired, as you know, from behavior change to value something that's taken away from us more than something we gain. So this business of loss is important. In fact, some of the salience work in America shows that it turns out most Americans, particularly American men, still think they're cowboys. So they value the open plain and presumably hunting bison or buffalo or something. It's the loss of that concerns them, the loss of this perceived natural big expanse that makes a difference. On the youth bit, by the way, just picking up on that, and I mean, I think we're all aware, laying this on youth as their problem to fix is a tough gig because they don't have the money or the agency. So I take your point actually from earlier on, which is tell them to kick the arse of their parents, basically, and the people around them. That's what they've got to do.
They're very good at it. Okay, Saul, do you want a very quick one because we've got to wrap it up?
10 seconds, Phoenix. Thank you. Thank everyone for being on this call. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. My 3 words were inspiring, authoritative, but petrifying. This was more powerful than the 27th of November in Westminster. I think it's because it went deeper. I think it was more intimate. That was brilliant. This was absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity because we're all in it together, right?
Absolutely. And Drawdown, one of my favourite books. And just to mention next week's webinar, Peter Townsend is talking about something called a cooperating system. We talk about system change over climate change. We actually want a cooperation system rather than the competition. So next week's webinar is about an operating system they've got for getting all the centres and groups and projects cooperating, sharing data on all sorts of really incredible stuff. Had a session with him this afternoon. We've got Lieutenant General Nugee coming up as well.
Phoenix. Peter Anderson.
Yeah. Brilliant. Peter Anderson is next week, and then we've got Kate Rawls from a journey around South America, and then I think the next one we post, it might be Tessa is it coming up? Kate Rawls. Then we got Hayley Fowler, Professor of Climate Change Impacts in Newcastle University and the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change. And then on the 13th of May, we're very honoured to have national security issues with Lieutenant General Richard Nugee, who did the national emergency briefing. So hopefully this keeps building up. Join the momentum chat, folks, and let's keep building up this head of steam and all of those places all around the country showing this film. Hopefully it's the big wake up we need to galvanise, to mobilise for solutions for a sustainable future. Over to you, Hugh, for parting comments. Thank you so much for coming. Amazing.
Nothing to say except thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I've got to be careful where I dispense my time because I have none left. And I'm very, very glad I made time for this. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
You were incredible. One of the most powerful speakers we've had in 4 or 5 years. Really, really powerful. Just really summed up and hopefully galvanise people into action for solutions. Thank you very much, Hugh. And thank you to everyone who's come. Thank you for your precious time. Keep networking it. It'll be up on the main CC chat and the momentum chat in the next hour. Please network it and please comment. Keep networking. One love.